The third industrial revolution.
Every community has to be responsible for its biosphere, which is the 19 kilometers of life from the ground to the stratosphere. In all honesty, we never really were a geopolitical world with all of the borders and territories and nations. Nature doesn't honour these fictions. We need to move beyond geopolitical to biosphere consciousness. In a geopolitical world, we compete for scarce resources in a zero-sum game. Our nations on our behalf do the same thing. This leads to war, including the two world wars, mostly because of coal and oil, and it caused millions of deaths. We don't need to militarize the nations when everyone is producing sun and wind energy and producing a surplus and sharing it with each other. Most wars are fought for resources, especially energy. But when we're getting all the energy we need from our environments, we don't need to militarize our nations. And this really is the change from geopolitics to biosphere consciousness. We also need to look at our eating habits. Some time back, Brazil was burning down the Amazon rainforest to get to 6 inches of topsoil to graze cows for the beef on your plate. And this happens everywhere around the world. There are about 1.5 billion cows in the world. They take up 27% of the land mass, and the methane they make is 23 times more powerful than CO2, and the nitrous oxide from their poop is 288 times more powerful than CO2. Only 60% of topsoil is left now on Earth, as it takes about 1,000 years to create. And half of the agricultural land is feed grain for cattle. However, food like legumes only use 1/10 of the acreage, and they're also more healthy and they're full of protein. So we need to change our diets to buy time and become healthier. We will also be more in tune with what the earth can sustainably produce. We need to put in this new infrastructure in the coming years because the old infrastructure is collapsing. Infrastructure transitions also change your worldviews. They change your temporal spatial orientation. We always increase our empathy each time we go through a transition, from hunter-gatherer societies with about 150 people, and then we moved into big agricultural civilizations. Thousands of people came together beyond their blood ties, which was scary for people. And so they integrated them into this infrastructure with these great religions. They saw each other as a figurative family, and empathy was extended to the infrastructure collectivities, so we could empathize with a broader social dynamic. So basically, beyond blood ties, people are kind of scared to know whether someone is their friend or their foe. So they built these more widely developed infrastructures, and they developed religions in order to get people to see each other as family. In the 19th century, the first industrial revolution led to, in Europe, for example, people having common education, celebrations, historical events, and other indirect ties. This was part of the nation state, and citizens saw themselves as family. We are now connecting the world with biosphere consciousness. We're seeing ourselves in this moment as an endangered species, with our fellow animals as part of our evolutionary heritage, and the earth as a common habitat. Although there have been bad times in terms of our evolutionary history, Nonetheless, our history shows that we are capable of profound change in society. The cruel lesson of climate change is that we now know everything we do has an effect on everything else, but there's also a silver lining. We have to be fearless. We have to be resilient. We need people on the streets and on these assemblies. We need the younger generation to also run for political office. We need to use every tool at our disposal. You need to create smart cooperative small and medium enterprises and involve yourself in civil society. Develop your infrastructure. The first industrial revolution was built between 1860 and 1890. That's the juvenile infrastructure. That's 30 years. That's all it took to build a new infrastructure. And that included homes, railroads, telegraph, universities. In just 30 years, and it took a further 20 years to mature that infrastructure. The second industrial revolution was built in just 25 years, from 1908 with cars from Ford, for example, to about 1932. Then it matured after the Second World War with highways, etc. And if we can do all of these things in 25 to 30 years, because basically the second one took 25 years instead of 30 because it built off the first one, we can probably do the third industrial revolution in about 20 years. And this will take us to zero carbon. Not net zero, but zero. After 200,000 years of this human journey, we have been caught in this situation. We need to dedicate ourselves to working in peer assemblies in all areas to make this transition. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? We need to look back at this moment in the future and say, we took action. We need to heal the planet. We need to be hopeful, but not naive. We need to focus on the goal and not be distracted by the noise. We need to ride the wave and not drown in despair. In the early days of this transition, we need to push for this day in and day out. Do a little bit every day, but also don't get burnt out. Climate change will test the human race like no other period in history. Be tough, be fearless, be resilient. Accept that there will be setbacks. Climate change will mean that central governments will not be able to handle every local issue caused by this crisis. However, they can still maintain the backbone of the national power grid and the highways, for example. We want communities to develop cooperatives so that resources are kept locally and they will be empowered to manage their own areas, guided by government regulations. The more distributed the system, the less vulnerable it will be to cyber attacks or climate events. We will be able to de-link from the continental grids to stop the spread of these issues when they crop up, and then connect again once they die down. Every community can control its own infrastructure, water, power, mobility, logistics, in commons, and these can be managed by cooperatives, which are run by billions of people around the world already. These cooperatives already exist, so it's a case of expanding them. Not a single business school mentions cooperatives, but they are massive. And by working in communities, we will develop our local social ties. We will develop new skills, we will develop resilience, and we can be empowered and not so dependent on the state.
The third industrial revolution.